Keep tuned to your NBC station for the latest news. All programs will be interrupted instantly for the latest and most up-to-the-minute news. Stay tuned to NBC.
Italian port of Genoa has been attacked in heavy strength. And now, a report from the German radio. 2 more Allied airborne divisions and many hundreds of gliders have landed north of Bayeux today. This is the first report of a daylight operation on such a large scale. And now we take you to London for a report from NBC's Merrill Muller. Go ahead, London.
This is Merrill Muller reporting from the Allied Advance Command Post of the Invasion Forces. I have just finished a tour of several hospital wards of some of our American wounded evacuated from the beachheads in France on D-Day. These men, all that I talked to, were both Army and Navy personnel in the first wave of our forces to strike the beaches. General Eisenhower, early in the day, in his special message, spoke of the magnificence of the troops doing that fighting in France. The best confirmation at hand for the moment is the spirit of the wounded. One boy echoed it perfectly. He was sitting up in bed talking to us, although sitting up was somewhat of a strain for him. Both his legs and his back were full of shrapnel. A husky Pennsylvanian, he grinned at us sheepishly and said, and I quote his exact words, "Me? I feel like going back. All of us want to get back there as soon as possible." We were visiting one of the huge American station hospitals readied in England for the handling of casualties. Located in a former girls' school, it had prepared wards of 535 beds for second front wounded. It had received only 85 patients so far, and reports indicate other base hospitals were working on the same percentage. That confirms the miracle that casualties were way below D-Day expectations. A full staff of American doctors and nurses with latest medical equipment of all types were handling patients with tremendous efficiency. We watched one youngster lowered from the ambulance that brought him from the Port Medical Battalion handling patients from the battlefield. This lad suffered a broken leg and both arms broken as a result of a mine blast to his ship. All the breaks were set by the medical services on the beaches. The splints were quickly examined. The boy was again treated for shock, and in 5 minutes he was in a comfortable, soft, warm bed in his own ward. His stretcher, by the way, also had a mattress and was piled high with blankets. Then, conducted by the commanding officer, we went through the wards. In one of the first was a quiet figure receiving all the excellent attention afforded the others. He was a German, and being well taken care of under the Geneva Conventions. One of our sharpshooters had put a bullet through his shoulder and into his chest. In another room was a young lad who didn't want to fight, particularly now that his country was being liberated, but he had to fight us or get a bullet in the back. He was lucky, this Italian. One of our paratroopers had knocked him off with a bullet in his side that did not inflict too serious a wound. But it was the Americans I wanted to see and report to you. One of the first I talked to was a tall, handsome, dark-haired man of 20. He came from Brooklyn. He had light shrapnel wounds in his shoulder and one leg. This fighting man was a member of the United States Navy Special Beach Battalion that cleared one beach for the British and American infantry. He hit the beach before our infantry. He was the first wave of the first wave. His entire party carried out its work of demolition despite heavy shell fire that took continuous casualties among them. Suddenly, a shell burst 5 feet from our Brooklynite. His buddies were killed. He himself would have been worse wounded, except 2 things deflected or absorbed the shrapnel. One was his shovel alongside his leg. The other was a pack on his back, a pack of 35 pounds of high explosive. The wounded man was in a buoyant frame of mind. I was hit, he said, and moved to a medical detachment setting up on the beach under very heavy fire. After I had been treated and was awaiting evacuation, he said, I watched our infantry and tanks come ashore. We had cleared the beaches and blown holes in the seawall. There was some trouble with the surf, but our men were getting the things done. Another ward contained several members of the seldom appreciated American Merchant Marine. These boys had been burned when their ship was set on fire, but they had controlled it and then were evacuated. Their burns were painful, but they have already had the best medical treatments known to science and will recover without scars. A Georgian, member of a heavy weapons crew, said he had just driven his outfit into position from their barge when he was struck. As he was evacuated, after being taken care of under fire by another medic, he said our tanks started landing without difficulty. No enemy aircraft were sighted while he was in France, which was the first 6 hours of the landing. The Allied air cover, this ground soldier described as complete and perfect. A great husky young man from Missouri described for us how his outfit built the roads and cleared the mines from the beach water line to beyond the seawall, which apparently stretched along the whole coast. The engineers, he said, were working ahead of us, clearing mines and breaching the seawall. We were laying a portable roadbed from the barge to the wall when Jerry started laying down a heavy artillery barrage zeroed right in on the beach. I was one of the first hit, and there were several other casualties, but the work went on. Then some of our parachutists sneaked in with a batch of prisoners, which I saw them put into a pen the engineers had already built, and they built it under fire. Our beaches were pretty easy, he added, in a tone which indicated a frank admission of something which we should understand despite the work these men are doing. The Pennsylvanian I mentioned previously was part of a heavy mortar company. Their boat was damaged and foundered just before touching the beach. Nevertheless, these men piled out and carried on their assignment without confusion. The Pennsylvanian had been wounded when the ship sank, but he carried on with his outfit more than 1,000 yards inland before a doctor spotted him and ordered him back. The outfit was under continuous heavy shell fire, and, like those in many small boats, found it very rough getting to the beach. Many were swamped. On this part of the beachhead, no planes were sighted, indicating again perfect Allied air cover. The Navy, our Pennsylvanian said, was firing counter-battery barrages all the time, but the enemy's guns were apparently mobile and kept moving. Some, which were stationary, would cease fire when any of our spotter planes appeared. One twin-gun installation just off the beach was playing havoc with our initial landing forces until 21 infantrymen sacrificed themselves to knock it out. They charged the gun pit stuffed with grenades and throwing them as they approached. The guns were put out of action, and the German crews were killed. The beachhead area, the Pennsylvanian said, was well cleared up, but the great minefields lay further inland, as well as a flood bar. This gunner said 9 of his buddies were killed before his eyes as they set up their gun to go into action. Then the shell which wounded him also wounded all the gunners of his section, except those manning 2 guns. The remaining crews quit the manning of the weapons and went into action. As he was coming back, the Pennsylvanian said, he saw our troops and tanks going through the seawall into the open, rolling fields of France and attacking over a wide area. The morale of all the wounded was something beyond belief. With a thumbs-up attitude, they accepted their lot as the fortunes of war, worried about their comrades, and were anxious to get back to help the fight in France. You noted, no doubt, that all of them mentioned the excellent work of the medical battalions on the beaches themselves. A preliminary report from base hospitals here indicates this work is perfect, but it also has great courage. The consensus of the men I talked to is one of the highest tributes to the United States Army Medical Corps yet recorded. They all said, those medics, they're wonderful. They're right in there with us, looking after us, and our beach hospitals and casualty stations were under continuous fire on D-Day. Why, when the soldiers took cover as a near one whistled in, those medics went right on working. They took a lot of casualties in their own ranks, but they took care of us, and they took care of their own right alongside us. The medical battalions in the beachhead treat the wounded on the field and then move them back to evacuation points. Further treatment is given there and on the boat returning to England, where the wounded either go to an emergency hospital or to a base hospital such as the one we visited. Most of the wounded reported so far appear to be shrapnel cases, whereas we expected heavy minefield casualties. Thus, the exceptional work of the engineers is underlined. In fact, as these wounded reports I have read to you indicate, every man in that beachhead is doing a superhuman job. They certainly must have that feeling which is expressed in one of General Eisenhower's favorite poems, one which he reread only last night. The quotation is, quote, "A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a hero dies but one," unquote. They are all heroes over there in France. And here's a footnote. One outfit got so excited and anxious about D-Day that it hurried its assault craft and hit the beach 10 minutes ahead of H hour, the first to strike on French soil. It belonged to the United States Navy. Now back to the United States.
You've just listened to Merrill Muller, NBC correspondent in London.
A little over a half hour ago, Supreme Allied Headquarters released its 6th invasion communique, and here is a summary of its contents. American bridgeheads in Normandy are being gradually enlarged. British and Canadian troops continue to make progress. Repeated enemy attacks against the 6th Airborne Division are being held. The enemy is fighting fiercely, and his reserves are now in action along the whole front. Supplies are entering the bridgehead at a satisfactory rate, communique added, and the development of the beachhead continues. All afternoon, shortwave monitors here in the NBC newsroom in New York have been listening in on European broadcasts reported from German, British, and neutral shortwave stations. Here are several of these reports received during the past hour. Radio Atlantic, a secret station somewhere in Europe, says Field Marshal Erwin Rommel has moved his headquarters to the village of Châteaubourg, just behind the fighting front in France. Châteaubourg is 11 miles southeast of Rennes, and it's about 160 miles west of Paris. Rommel is said to have taken his private physician with him to his new headquarters. The same Radio Atlantic, as heard by NBC, reports also that an order of the day has been issued to German troops defending the Atlantic Wall in France. That order of the day says that every German soldier must make the best of the weapons he has because of the difficulties in getting arms and munitions to the front. After all, continues the German order of the day, the invasion front is not the only one we have to face. Our first concern is still the Russian front. And here's one from the German radio in Berlin dealing with the Italian front. The German retreat in Italy says Radio Berlin has developed into a series of disengaging movements. The Allied dispatches from Rome says the Nazis are in full flight more than 40 miles north of Rome. And a French broadcast says the Allies have cut the Caen to Paris road in 8 places. Supreme Allied Headquarters, Allied Air Forces have established at least one air base and probably more in the French invasion zone. The headquarters announces that 27,000 individual air missions were carried out between dawn on D-Day and midday today. Again from Supreme Allied Headquarters, the enemy is fighting fiercely. His reserves have now been in action along the whole front. With the safe and timely arrival of merchant convoys and improvement in the weather, unloading of supplies is proceeding at a satisfactory rate. Here are other invasion reports, all from enemy sources. The Paris radio says 20 Allied divisions now have landed in Normandy, and it adds that the battle is growing in depth. At the same time, Berlin radio reports an Allied tank push has driven as much as 6 miles south of captured Bayeux. The German news agency DNB announced tonight that the 2 new airborne landings have occurred in the Bayeux area. DNB adds, our bridgehead now is 36 miles wide, and German troops have been withdrawn north of the captured city. And here's another report from Berlin radio. It says the Allies have thrust into the strategic city of Caen, which is 16 miles southeast of Bayeux. Violent fighting is now going on, the radio says, with tanks, mounted infantry, and mobile troops. And late today, the Allied command, in a broadcast over the Brazzaville radio, appealed to Norwegian, Danish, Belgian, Dutch, and French fishermen not to go out in the waters off their coasts between now and June 15th, lest they hamper Allied operations. This broadcast came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York and Merrill Muller in London. This is the National Broadcasting Company.